My name is Ethan Walker, and until that weekend, I thought every horror story about the deep woods was exaggerated. I grew up in Oregon surrounded by forests, and I had spent years hiking, fishing, and camping without experiencing anything stranger than a curious bear sniffing around a campsite. That confidence was exactly why I agreed to join my friends Jake, Ryan, and Melissa on a 3-day camping trip deep inside a remote section of national forest where few people ever went. The area was miles away from the nearest road, beyond marked trails, and surrounded by endless pine trees. Locals sometimes called it the Black Pines because the trees grew so densely that sunlight barely reached the ground. We laughed when an old gas station clerk warned us not to stay out there after dark. He looked genuinely nervous and said, "If you hear someone calling your name from the trees at night, don't answer." We assumed he was trying to scare tourists. Looking back, I wish we had listened. The first day went perfectly. We hiked nearly 8 miles into the wilderness, crossed a shallow creek, and found a clearing large enough for our tents. The place felt isolated in a way that was difficult to describe. There were no distant highway sounds, no aircraft overhead, and not even many birds. The silence seemed unusually heavy. Still, we set up camp, gathered firewood, and spent the evening laughing around the campfire. As darkness settled over the forest, the trees became enormous black walls surrounding us from every direction. Around midnight, while the others were talking, I noticed something strange. The forest had gone completely silent. Even the insects had stopped making noise. Before I could mention it, a sharp cracking sound echoed from somewhere beyond the trees. Then another. Then another. Something large was moving through the woods. We assumed it was a deer, yet the footsteps sounded slow and deliberate, as if whatever was out there knew exactly where we were. Ryan grabbed a flashlight and shined it toward the darkness. For a moment, nothing appeared. Then we saw 2 reflective points between the trees. They looked like eyes. The strange part was their height. They weren't near the ground like a deer's eyes. They were at least 7 feet above it. We stared for several seconds before the eyes disappeared behind a tree. Jake joked that Bigfoot had found us, and everyone laughed nervously. Eventually, we returned to our tents. Around 2 a.m., I woke suddenly. Something had pulled me from sleep. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it clearly. Footsteps. Slow footsteps circling our campsite. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They moved around the perimeter of our tents, never getting closer, never moving away. I reached for my flashlight, but hesitated. Every instinct told me not to look outside. After nearly 10 minutes, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt even worse. The next morning, I mentioned what I had heard. To my surprise, Melissa admitted she had heard it too. Ryan claimed he slept through the night, but Jake looked pale. Eventually, he confessed that he had heard someone whisper his name outside his tent. Not once, but several times. He thought one of us was playing a prank, so he almost unzipped the tent. Then he remembered that everyone had gone to sleep hours earlier. The rest of the day felt different. Nobody openly said they were scared, but the excitement from the previous day was gone. While exploring near the creek, we discovered something even stranger. Deep in the mud were footprints. At first they appeared human, but they were much larger than normal. Each print looked unnaturally long and narrow. We followed them for about 50 yards before they vanished among the rocks. There were no signs of another campsite nearby, and no reason for anyone else to be that deep in the wilderness. That evening we decided to leave the following morning instead of staying an extra day. None of us wanted to admit why. After sunset, we kept the campfire burning as brightly as possible. Around 10 p.m., a distant scream echoed through the forest. It sounded human. Every conversation stopped instantly. The scream lasted only a few seconds before disappearing into the darkness. We listened carefully, expecting another cry for help, but nothing followed. Ryan insisted it was probably a mountain lion. Maybe he was right, yet none of us believed it. An hour later, while staring into the trees, Melissa suddenly grabbed my arm, so hard it hurt. She pointed toward the edge of the clearing. Standing between 2 pine trees was a tall figure. It appeared completely black against the darkness. We couldn't make out a face. We couldn't even tell whether it was a person. It simply stood there, motionless, watching us. When Jake aimed his flashlight toward it, the figure stepped behind a tree. We rushed over immediately, but nobody was there. Sleep became impossible. We sat around the dying fire until after midnight. Eventually, exhaustion forced us into our tents. I lay awake, listening to the forest. Then came the whispering. It started faintly, almost blending with the wind. At first, I couldn't understand the words. Slowly, they became clearer. Someone was speaking outside my tent. The voice sounded exactly like my younger brother. That was impossible because he was hundreds of miles away at home. The voice kept repeating my name. Ethan, Ethan, come here. Every hair on my body stood up. Then I heard another voice calling Ryan's name. Another call from Melissa. The voices moved through the campsite, perfectly imitating people we knew. Nobody responded. After several minutes, the whispering stopped. I finally thought it was over. Then something heavy slammed against the side of my tent. I nearly screamed. The impact was so strong that the entire tent shook violently. Before I could react, something began walking around it in slow circles that I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The campfire had almost died, leaving only faint orange embers. At the edge of the clearing stood multiple figures. Not one, not two, at least 5. They were scattered among the trees, completely still. The darkness hid their features, but their shapes looked wrong somehow. Their arms seemed too long. Their bodies appeared unnaturally thin. I quickly zipped the tent shut and grabbed my knife, even though I knew it would be useless. Then came a sound I will never forget. One of the figures laughed. The laugh perfectly matched Jake's voice. A second figure answered using Melissa's voice. A third responded using mine. Whatever was outside had somehow learned our voices. Moments later, chaos erupted. Ryan shouted from his tent. Melissa screamed. Something began running through the campsite at incredible speed. Branches snapped. Equipment crashed to the ground. The sounds came from every direction at once that we abandoned everything. Tents, backpacks, food, none of it mattered anymore. Armed only with flashlights, we ran into the darkness. It was a terrible decision, but panic had taken over. The forest seemed endless. Every tree looked identical. Behind us, we could hear movement matching our pace. Sometimes it sounded like one thing chasing us. Other times it sounded like dozens. After nearly 20 minutes of running, we reached the creek. We stopped briefly to catch our breath. That's when Jake pointed across the water. Standing on the opposite bank was one of the figures. For the first time, we saw it clearly. It was tall, impossibly thin, and pale as bone. Its eyes reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's. The creature tilted its head and smiled. The smile stretched far wider than any human smile should. Then, using Jake's exact voice, it said, "Why are you leaving?" None of us waited to hear more. We ran again. Dawn finally began to lighten the sky after what felt like an eternity. As sunlight filtered through the trees, the sounds behind us faded. We eventually reached a ranger access road and flagged down a passing truck. The driver immediately noticed our condition. We were exhausted, covered in mud, and visibly terrified. When we told him where we had camped, his expression changed. He became quiet for several seconds before saying, "People have reported strange things out there for years." He refused to elaborate. Back in town, we learned something unsettling. Several hikers had vanished in that region over the past decade. Authorities never found clear explanations. Most cases were attributed to accidents or getting lost. Yet locals had their own theories. Stories circulated about creatures that lived deep within the forest, creatures that mimicked human voices to lure people away from safety. The stories sounded ridiculous until we remembered what happened that night, that it's been 4 years since that camping trip, and none of us have returned to those woods. We rarely discuss what happened. Ryan moved to another state. Melissa refuses to camp anywhere without large groups nearby. Jake still wakes up from nightmares. As for me, I can never forget one final detail. When we escaped the campsite, we left everything behind. A week later, forest rangers recovered some of our equipment and returned it to us. Most items were damaged by weather and wildlife. But my backpack contained something that shouldn't have been there. Folded neatly inside was a piece of bark. Carved into its surface was a single sentence. The handwriting wasn't human, yet the message was unmistakable. Next time, answer when we call. I have never gone back to verify what lives in those woods, and I never will. Because deep down, I know one terrifying truth. Whatever watched us from the Black Pines that night wasn't hunting us for food. It was trying to get us to join it in the darkness forever.